is going on, people? Welcome back to another edition of Ancient Egypt. We are getting close to the end of this series, but do not worry. Do not worry. I have other things planned in the works, things I'm working on. So, ancient Egyptian history, the Ptolemies commissioned, I can't pronounce that word right, so I'm not even going to try. Basically, the first Bible. The first Bible. And all others, including the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, borrowed heavily from this Bible that was based on ancient Egyptian religion. Like I said, I try not to get too heavy into the religious aspect of it. But trust me, I plan on doing a series about the Bible where we will pick apart the whole book, section by section, so we can have a better understanding of how we got to this point. Because evidently, Ptolemy wanted to give something back to the people. He's taken so much, but he wanted to give some culture. He wanted to give information. He wanted people to be educated. Not as educated as himself, but still, basic reading, writing, understanding things. That'd be nice. So he runs Egypt like a business. Ptolemy II comes along and he pretty much does the same thing. The third Ptolemy comes along and we might have some issues, but from what I'm understanding, he makes a good run at it. But after the third one, ain't no promises. Let's get into it.
He does quite a few nice things. One is he builds an Egyptian temple at Edfu. Now, Edfu is in the south of Egypt. It's a southern temple. It's large. It is one of the best preserved temples in all of Egypt. It is huge. Now, let's think about what Ptolemy III is doing in building Edfu Temple, right? One thing is he's getting along with the Egyptian priests.
Okay, stop. I just had a thought. I wasn't really trying to interrupt, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So, I was watching some YouTube clips, and you had these scientists saying that the Egyptian pharaohs were white. They lied. Technically, they were telling the truth, but they lied. What it was is they took it. Now that I'm listening to this information, is bringing back memories of things that I had heard before, and I'm like, how could they be white? How could they be white? The Ptolemies, Greek, they were white. They were white. And I'm pretty sure a lot of the Greek nobility were buried in Egypt. So what I'm thinking is, just hear me out, just a thought, but what I'm thinking is, these scientists have been trying to discredit black people for thousands of years. So now the new thing is, okay, well, it wasn't built by aliens, but it wasn't built by blacks either. It was built by white people. No. They came in and took control of Egypt. They expanded commerce in Egypt But they did not build the foundation. The foundation was already there. Even some of the Greek philosophers said that they were inspired by Egypt. So, I'm just saying, this theory that they have, this false narrative, this falsehood that they have, saying that Egypt was built by, no, they weren't built by the Greeks. The Greeks came, that's like you get a deck added to your house, but you already had the house for 10, 20 years. Okay, the deck is now part of the house, but anybody that remembers you from before you got the deck, I mean, come on now, they might not know that you got a deck if they haven't seen you in a while. So what are they going to say when they see you again, or when they come to the house? Oh, that's nice, you got a deck? When did you get that? Same thing I'm saying about the Greeks and these fake ass scientists. When did you get that? That's exactly what I'm saying. When did you get this notion that the Greeks built Egypt? Egypt was already built when they got there. Columbus didn't discover America. People were already here when they got there. So what they're doing is they're taking one little clip out of history where white people ruled the country, where white people took over the country, renamed it, and they're saying that this is the God's gospel. It's not. And quite frankly, I'm offended. If the Greeks is telling you they took inspiration from the black people, from Egypt, and let's be honest, Egyptians might not have been dark-skinned, but throughout the history of Egypt, they had commerce with Cushites. They were intertwined with the Sudans. So it's quite possible. Matter of fact, I can almost tell you it most definitely. That's like if I always gotta relay these messages in modern times so more people can understand. You move from New York to Chicago on a business trip. You're doing business in Chicago. Things change in your life. You end up staying in Chicago. You're not going to stay by yourself for the rest of your life. Even if you don't get married, you're going to date somebody from Chicago. You might even have kids with somebody from Chicago. So are those kids Chicagoans or are they New Yorkers? They're a little bit of both. But to tell these kids as they're growing up, you ain't no New Yorker, it's in their DNA. They have attributes from their parents from both Chicago and New York. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. And if they're raised with those same values, then they'll be at home whether they're in Chicago or New York. But to tell them they're not a New Yorker, I mean, they don't live in New York, but they have roots in New York. They have family in New York, as well as Chicago. I myself am not from Chicago. But I know from my family history, after the Great Migration, a lot of my people moved to Chicago. So my roots, my personal family roots, are from Chicago. Now my whole complete family history would go way back. We already know that it goes back further than that. But in the recent 100 years of my family, it goes back to Chicago. From the South to Chicago and to where I am now. So again, where'd you get that information from? These idiot so-called professional scientists, archaeologists, whatever you want to call them, sitting up here trying to tell people, oh, the Greeks were white. White people ruled Egypt. That was one section of history. And it wasn't even the beginning. It wasn't the beginning. Did white people come in and rule Egypt? Yes. But they didn't create Egypt. They didn't start Egypt. They didn't build Egypt. It was already there. They took over and they ran it like a business. And like any good business, if you want to stay in business, you have to expand. And that's what Alexander the Great did. He expanded. He built. It ain't personal. It's just business. That being said,
they like to build temples, they know about rituals, and if you build a temple, in a sense, you're creating a bureaucracy. You're going to need more priests to staff it and so on. So the priests are probably happy about this. There's no question about that. The temple is dedicated to one of the traditional gods, Horus, right? The main god. Remember, the pharaoh has always been identified with Horus. So in a sense, maybe they convince him, they tell him that, look, this is a temple to you, really. It's Horus, you're the falcon on earth, whatever. But he builds this big temple. It's well preserved. Almost all of the very well preserved temples in Egypt are built by the Ptolemies. Now there's a couple of reasons for that. One is they're the most recent, of course, of the Egyptian temples. So they've had fewer years to be pulled down, blocks to be reused. So that's one. They're the newcomers to the Egyptian temples. But the other is, after the Ptolemies died out, these things fell into disrepair. There were no longer priests who were supported. So people actually built their houses on top of the temples. The temples became sort of filled in, and they were preserved by this. So the best temples in Egypt are Ptolemaic ones. Right? But it's dedicated to Horus. Now, on the walls of this temple is the oldest drama in the world. It's a play. And it's sort of what we would call a mystery play. In ancient Egyptian times, not Ptolemaic times, but the times of the pharaohs, the very early times of the pharaohs, perhaps just after Narmer, undoubtedly the king was the high priest. He was the whole show. And there were myths, of course, we talked about them, the myth of Isis and Osiris. And this pharaoh, high priest, would go throughout Egypt and would have to enact rituals, various ceremonies. And one of them was the triumph of Horus over Seth. Now remember, Seth, also called Set, is the evil brother who has killed Osiris, and Horus is the avenger, right? Well, in one of the myths,
the first avenger.
One of the myths, it's called the contending of Horus and Seth, right? They're battling each other, they're contentious. In this myth, Osiris is already dead, but Horus, the son of the god, wants his rightful inheritance, right? He's the son of Osiris, who is in a sense the pharaoh of Egypt. He wants his rightful inheritance, the world. He wants to rule over Egypt. Now, evil Seth says, no, I'm the stronger. Now, it's an interesting conflict. It's between the rightful heir and the stronger. Right? That's the claim. And the gods are not sure how to settle this. It's kind of a litigious thing. The gods are not sure how to settle it. Well, he's stronger, maybe he should rule. Well, he's the sun, maybe he should rule. And for 80 years, they're battling it out, trying to... And in this myth, all kinds of things happen. For example, Seth, by magic, is turned into a hippopotamus. He's often shown as a hippopotamus. Now, Horus is about to do him in. He's going to harpoon him. Right? But Seth, clever, remember, he's this devil figure. He's always going to be there. He's sort of existential evil. You know, it's like in the fortune cookies when you get that little fortune that says, say what you will about the devil, he's a hustler. You know, that's Seth. Right? He's about to be harpooned. Horus is going to do him in, and he cries out to Isis, sister, save me. Right? This is kind of... And remember, Isis is this nurturing goddess. So she can't let her brother die. She saves him. Right? He should have been killed, but she saves him. Right? And Horus is so angered by this that he, in anger, cuts off his mother's head, cuts off Isis's head. Now, it's a very long myth, which I'm not going to go into in any more detail. But the point is, you have these contendings, and the good news is Isis's head is restored. That's okay. But what happens, right, is we get this battle, and in the end, only in the end, after the great battle, is Horus given Egypt to rule. Set, by the way, is given something. It's not just, oh, he's a creep, banish him. No, he's given the desert. Right? The Egyptians never liked the desert. That was a place where who knows what lived. So Seth is given the desert, Horus is given earth, and goodness triumphs over evil. Now, this is on the walls of Edfu Temple built by Ptolemy III. In ancient days, when I say ancient, again, back to the time of Narmer, the earliest dynasties, the pharaoh would have gone up and down Egypt and enacted the contendings of Horus and Seth, with Pharaoh playing the part of Horus, defeating Seth, and that means Ma'at, divine order, will rule. Right? And each year the Pharaoh would have to do this to make sure that there'd be divine order for the following year. So on the walls of Edfu Temple is this ritual that the Pharaoh would have gone through. And if you read the walls of Edfu Temple, and when I say read it, you don't need the hieroglyphs for this one. There are pictures. You'll see Horus on a little papyrus skiff, a little boat, harpooning, set as a hippo beneath it. So Ptolemy III is putting very traditional stuff on the walls of his temple. Undoubtedly, his priests are advising him, right? So this is one good thing that our last good Ptolemy does. He does Edfu Temple. And on the walls also is another ritual which was enacted for thousands of years before him and was enacted for the next few hundred years. Whenever a temple was built, a ceremony called the stretching of the cord had to be performed. Now this was, in a sense, it's the laying of the foundation stone, and it's not unlike what even modern masons do today when they're doing a foundation. You have these cords stretched out, so you know it's true, it's squared, and on the walls it shows this ceremony for this very temple, and it's got the goddess Seshat. She is the goddess of writing in the sense of measurements. She's kind of an engineer, and she records exactly the measurements of the temple, and they did the stretching of the cord when the pharaoh would come. And this is on Edfu Temple. So there's a reaching back to the old history of Egypt, but certainly it's the priests who are telling them what to do. By the way,
again, I ain't making this stuff up. Again, even in the mythical stories, the goddess meaning feminine, meaning female, the goddesses had their own responsibilities. And this one is likened to an engineer, a female engineer. Wow. Not unlike, I mean, heck, some of the best cooks in the world were women. The women took care of the kids, the household, while the men were out slaying the dragons, killing the dinosaurs. You know, he go out and kill the bacon and bring it home, and she cooked the bacon. But women, all throughout history of Negroes, back in ancient times, we have always respected our women. This notion that women can't be as good as men, we got two different responsibilities. But that don't mean that their responsibilities aren't important, because they were. You had a goddess who was in charge of engineering. She kept measurements of everything. What? And even if the Greeks did have a goddess like that, they borrowed the concept from Egypt, from Africa. Come on now, they didn't already admitted it. It's the later generations that don't want to admit the truth. I don't know what to tell you. Black women, take note. Listen to the program. You are valued. You're loved. You're respected. So this notion that you don't get no respect from black men, no. Some ignorant, hateful ass white woman didn't put that in your head. If you read into your ancient history, you were always important. You were always held in high regard. So come back home. We miss you. Get your head right and come back home. Let's get back to it.
And we're going to see this in just a few minutes. Whenever a temple was built, foundation deposits were laid at the four corners. It was a tradition that goes way back. At the four corners of the temple, once you figure out the dimensions of the temple, you've done your stretching of the cord, at the four corners, you dug a pit. And in that pit, you put clean sand, clean white sand. And in that pit that's now been lined with pure sand, you put little magical objects that would ensure that the temple would be constructed well. So, for example, in foundation deposits, you get little tiny brick molds, like the brick we made the bricks with, little tiny ones. You'll sometimes get tools, little miniature tools, and perhaps some inscriptions, a prayer for the temple or whatever, with the name of the pharaoh who's building the temple. So almost always at four corners of temples are foundation deposits. Still today, by the way, in Egypt, there are plenty of those deposits waiting to be discovered. In the 19th century, foundation deposits weren't really known. They didn't know that they had a lot of these foundation deposits, so people weren't looking for them. So a lot of the earlier places that have been excavated, there are still foundation deposits to be found. Also, sometimes you find them in curious places, but there's an explanation. For example, some temples have 6 foundation deposits. You know, why? Well, they started to build a temple. Let's say it was going to be a square. You dig your little 4 pits, and you have your foundation deposits. But now, as it's building, you decide, well, let's make it bigger. So you expand it now, making it a rectangle perhaps, but you've got another 2 new corners. So you dig another 2 foundation deposits. So sometimes temples have 6. So you have to be sort of vigilant. When you're excavating a temple, you have to see, was it enlarged? And then you know what to look for. But at Edfu Temple, undoubtedly, you had these foundation deposits, and it even shows the pharaoh present, putting some objects, 17 little bricks into remember, 17 was a magical number. And Edfu tells the whole story. So if you look at these temples, you'll get the story of what's going on. But this is Ptolemy III's temple at Edfu. We have a few records of him, what he did during his reign. One is called the Decree of Canopus. Canopus was a part of Egypt in the Delta. And this is really a stela. Remember our big round-top stones that anybody wanted to make an announcement he carved. And the Decree of the Canopus, we have 3 versions of it. Now, let me say why it's so important. Not just because it tells about Ptolemy, no. was just like the Rosetta Stone. It was written in 3 scripts, 2 languages if you'll remember. Egyptian is one language and Greek is the other. And this was written in hieroglyphs, right, which is Egyptian, hieroglyphic script, Demotic, which is Egyptian, more cursive script, and Greek. Right, so if the Rosetta Stone hadn't been found, we would have had this, which might have helped us. But it wasn't discovered until much later, 1881. We have a copy of it. But we have 3 different versions. This was important. We had 3 versions of it. Big stone, carved, right? It must have been placed at various temples for everybody to see. What does it tell us? It tells us basically that Ptolemy III was a good administrator, a good person. One thing it says, the Nile didn't rise during one of the years. Now what that means is famine, because you can't grow crops without water. And if the Nile didn't overflow its banks, the irrigation canals, even if you've dug them, are going to be empty. Ptolemy bought grain at a high price to feed the people, right? So he's viewed as a beneficent king. He's okay. It also says that Ptolemy recaptured the statues of the Egyptian gods that were taken away when the Persians invaded. Now, and that he brought them back and placed them in the temples again. This, of course, would have pleased the priests greatly. Now, the great thing about the ancient world was when you're interested in polytheism, when you believe in many gods, you know, you've got a lot of options. The Persians come in, conquer the Egyptians, and what do? They take back their gods. Maybe they're powerful. So they're stealing their gods, and they kept them because Ptolemy III finds them and brings them back. Kind of nice. And as a result of his good deeds, the priests erect this stela and say, Ptolemy is a wonderful person, and we're going to do something. Ptolemy had a daughter. Her name is Bernike. She died young, right? And what they say, what the priests say on this decree, is they are going to worship her. They're going to make offerings to her. It's the same as lighting a candle for her. And it's a very interesting way they refer to her. They call her Bernike, Lady of Virgins. Lady of Virgins. It's almost, the Virgin Mary. We're getting things out of Egyptian religion that are going to come to our lives. Let me read a little section of the Decree of Canopus, just so you get a feeling for the language and how it sounds and what the priests say. And this is what the priests declare, written on this decree in 3 scripts, so the Greeks can read it and so the Egyptians can read it. Ptolemy III and Bernike are continually performing many great benefits to the national temples, and take good care of the Apis and Menevis bulls. Now the Apis I've mentioned a few times. Next time we're going to talk about him in detail. It's a fascinating subject, the Apis. But he was a sacred bull, and Ptolemy III is taking good care of him. That means he's alive, the bull, and he's in a temple, and he's being fed and well cared for. The Menevis was another sacred bull from Heliopolis. We know hardly anything about him. But they're taking care of these bulls. And it says, taking care of the Apis and Menevis bulls and other renowned sacred animals. Animals were important to these Ptolemies, you'll see. And the sacred images carried off from the land by the Persians. The king, having made a foreign campaign, recovered into Egypt and restored to the temples from which each of them had been carried away. Right, so he's doing quite a lot for the Egyptians, both in economy and religion. Now, there's another monument of Ptolemy III that's really perhaps his most important. Remember last time I said that the Library of Alexandria, built by Ptolemy I, completed by Ptolemy II, disappeared. We have no traces. We really don't. There is, by the way, a library being built today in Alexandria on what they say is near the site of the original one. It's going to be a huge library, and they're hoping to fill it with all the books of the world. It's a wonderful project that the Egyptians are undertaking, and they're hoping to get world support also, and they probably will. But the library has disappeared. But there was supposedly a sister library, right? Sometimes called a daughter library. And this may be what is called today the Serapeum of Alexandria. There were 2 Serapia, right? 2 Serapeums. One was where the Apis bull was buried at Saqqara. That's the one we've talked about. But there's another that I haven't mentioned yet, and that's what we have to talk about now. The Serapeum of Alexandria. This is constructed by Ptolemy III, our last good Ptolemy. It is dedicated not to the bull, the Apis bull, no. It is dedicated to a Greek-created god. They manufactured this god, Serapis. It's a combination of the two gods, Apis. Apis was actually an ancient Egyptian called Ap. And the Greeks had the ending, so it's an Apis. And Osir was Osiris. So Osirapis becomes Serapis. Now, they manufactured them. Why? You've got 300,000 Greeks living in Alexandria. And these gods of the Egyptians look pretty weird. Body of a man, head of an ibis, a woman with the head of a lioness. They look strange. And the Ptolemies are smart people. They want to come up with a god that the Greeks can relate to, right? So they manufacture one, Serapis. He looks like Zeus, right?
Oh, wow.
He's got a beard, big long beard, very un-Egyptian for a god, right? On his head, he's got a basket, which contains produce, right? This is a god who kind of is the bountiful god, making sure that the land of Egypt will produce plenty. Interestingly, by the way, there is a slight Egyptian holdover here, I believe. In ancient Egypt, fertility gods were male. And in a sense, Serapis is a little bit of a fertility god, guaranteeing produce. For example, the major fertility god of ancient Egypt was Min, who is shown as a man with an erect phallus, showing that he will produce. So we have a kind of Egyptianized, very Greek version of a Min here. Now, the Temple of Serapis is dedicated to this god, but there is an important connection with the library. It is believed that this temple served a dual function. First, it's to worship the god Serapis. There were shrines where offerings could be made. But also, the architecture of it suggests that this may have housed papyri. This may be the famous daughter or sister library of the big one. The reason we think that is there were two fireplaces inside this temple, and throughout the building, going to various chambers, are pipes, which would bring hot air to the rooms. So it's kind of very early central heating. And many people think that the purpose of bringing hot air to these rooms is to preserve papyri in the moist Alexandria air. You got to keep it dry or it'll rot. So this may indeed have been what we would call today the annex of the Great Library. Now, there's another interesting sort of coda to this story of the Serapeum. Books were so important to the Ptolemies, so important, that when a ship came into the port of Alexandria, it was searched for books. And if it had books, they were taken off, they were confiscated, copied by scribes in the library, and then the copies were returned. Right? Ptolemies kept the originals, but they wanted everything. Now, the only library that even approached the Alexandria Great Library was at Pergamum in Asia Minor. And the competition was so fierce between the Alexandrian library and the Pergamum library that Egypt, the Ptolemies, stopped exporting papyrus because they didn't want the library at Pergamum to be able to copy all these books. They stopped exporting it. And you know a result of that sort of embargo on papyrus? The modern book. We have books today because the Ptolemies refused to export papyrus. What happened was, well, the Pergamum library couldn't get any papyrus, so what are they going to do? They're going to use vellum, sheepskin. But sheepskin doesn't roll nicely like papyri. You can't attach them and make a huge papyrus and roll it up. They stack better than they roll. And then when they started sewing leaves together, you got a book. So the first books are the result, really, of the Ptolemies sort of being greedy about their library.
Wow.
Now, this Serapeum, this place of Serapis, but also a library, had foundation deposits. They were discovered during World War II. There was an excavator. You know, one of the things about excavators are, no matter what happens, you keep excavating. Through wars, through terrorism, you go. And Alan Rowe, an excavator, while looking through the Serapeum, found foundation deposits. And interesting foundation deposits. And that's how we know for sure that Ptolemy III built this thing. Because we have foundation deposits, which were plaques. At the corners of the temple were found the pits. And in the pits were 10 plaques. 10. They were made of different material. 5 were glass. Now, glass was an important thing in Alexandria. They manufactured it. Alexandrian glass became famous, right? They made wonderful little inlays for furniture and things like that. And 5 of the plaques are glass. 1 is mud, clay. 1 is faience, a ceramic. 1 is bronze. 1 is silver. And 1 is gold, right? Virtually everything he'd build out of or the materials he would use. And on the plaques is an inscription saying, I'll tell you what it says, King of the South and North, heir of the brother gods, chosen of Amun, powerful in life, Ptolemy III, living forever, beloved of Ptah, he made the temple and sacred enclosure walls of Serapis. So,
Interesting. Very interesting. So what did y'all think about that? The Ptolemies. See, when I first started hearing about the Greeks and the Ptolemies, I hated them. I couldn't stand them. But now that I've explored this information, I realized that not all Ptolemies are the same. The first 3 Ptolemies were pretty decent, but after that, it just went to shit. It went downhill. So, they gave us the first lighthouse. They modernized commerce with money, currency. They did a lot of firsts. Now, that's not to put down Egypt. I would never do that, because even the greats, and I have to do it again like I always do, put it in modern terms, even the greats, Michael Jordan was inspired by somebody that came before him. So as great as the Greeks were, especially the Ptolemies, they were all inspired by Egypt, by Africa. So yeah, even to this day, if somebody does something really great to advance society, somebody else is going to come along and preserve that or try to better that. So yeah, that's just the part of the human condition. You want to do better in life. You know better, you do better. So let's talk about this. Let's discuss this. Chat it up in the comments. And with that, good people, I will talk to you later.